All right, hello everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to today's Next Century Cities members call on tech-powered civic engagement. My name is Kat Blake and I'm the Policy and Program Manager of Next Century Cities. I'm going to go over a few quick housekeeping details before we begin. First, everyone is automatically muted and we're asking everyone to remain on mute so that we can reduce the impact of background noise. Second, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, and we hope that you will, please type them in the chat box located on the bottom of the right hand of your screen. You can send them to all or just to the organizers, and we will be sure to address them during the call. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and shared on our resource page later today, should you want to refer back to it or share it with others. Now, before I hand off to Chris Mitchell, who will be moderating our webinar, I'd like to share a little bit of history. As many of you may know, Next Century Cities administered a grant program called the Benton Next Generation Engagement Awards. After a rigorous selection process, Louisville, Kentucky, Raleigh, North Carolina, and Austin, Texas each received a grant to build a civic engagement tool or program in which technology played an integral role. We monitored these projects closely and also researched a wide array of other projects from around the country. Our goal was to create a set of tools and actions that could support city efforts to implement projects just like these. The resulting playbook, called 5 Lessons for Tech-Powered Civic Engagement, is available at our site via the URL on your screen, and I'll also chat this URL to you via the chat box. Through working with these projects, we identified a set of lessons learned for building a tech-powered civic engagement project. You can see the 5 lessons we highlighted in the playbook listed on your screen. I'll just briefly go over each of these and explain them a little bit. So the first lesson is called Build With, Not For. This is the idea that you want to bring in the community that you wish to engage right from the beginning of your project. Be sure that the intervention you are choosing is actually impacting an issue that the community feels is a high priority. The second lesson is Partnerships Breed Results. It's necessary to break down silos and work collaboratively within government, with the community, and with assets like businesses, nonprofits, and philanthropies. The third lesson is Civic Technology is a Spectrum. So you want to ask yourself, what is your goal? Do you want residents to be informed, be engaged, or to actually have an impact on decisions being made? There's no one-size-fits-all project for a community. The fourth is the multiplier effect. This is the idea that effective civic technology projects yield benefits far beyond their immediate imagined goals. And last but not least, changing communities for the better. So engaging the community in meaningful ways can lead to feelings of empowerment and ownership that can improve the overall experience of citizens and change the way that they interact with their local government. And also included in this playbook is a simple checklist called Leveraging Technology for Civic Engagement, and we hope that cities can use this as a resource in starting their own projects. The checklist is also available at the URL that is listed. So, joining us on the call today is a distinguished group of panelists from cities across the country. We have Chris Osgood, who is the Chief of the Streets in the Department of Transportation and Sanitation in the city of Boston, Massachusetts. We're also joined by Ed Blaney, who is the Innovation Project Manager at the City of Louisville, Kentucky. Debbie Acosta, the Chief Innovation Officer in the City of San Leandro, California. And we may be joined by Dee Prasad, who is the Program Manager of Startup in Residence, which is housed in the Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation in San Francisco, California. And moderating this panel is our very own Christopher Mitchell, who is the Policy Director at Next Century Cities. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Chris.
Great, thank you. This is it's a great opportunity to get a lot of input from the audience, so please definitely do ask questions, and we will work them in as we're able to. Don't feel like you have to wait to throw them in the chat box. And I think I'd like to start by asking each of our presenters. I'll pick on Chris Osgood from Boston first. But I'd like from each presenter to start we'll do a very brief introduction from each of them to introduce some of the things they're working on. Then we're going to have more of a conversation. But for the brief introduction, Chris, I'd like to ask you to just pick one of the things you're doing in Boston around tech-powered civic engagement, and just give us, a 90-second overview of it so that we can get a sense of one interesting project.
Chris, thanks so much for the opportunity, and delighted to talk about some of the work we're doing in Boston. So our team largely focuses on the 9 square miles of the city of Boston that are Boston streets, how people move on them, so our transportation work, how we actually design and build those streets, and how we actually deliver great services on them, from filling potholes to keeping streetlights on to removing graffiti. Over the last 8 years or so, we've essentially had a progressive set of civic technology experiments in this space, similar to what many other cities have done, where we've been basically building off of that core 311 service and giving residents new ways to be able to engage with city government to get the basic things on their blocks that they want done actually taken care of. Again, from the pothole filled to the streetlight fixed, the graffiti removed. One of the more interesting things that we have done of late in response to some interest both from our employees and from the public is we've actually been working to make that technology less about simply connecting residents with sort of a faceless government, but actually really connecting that city employee with that city resident. So now when somebody actually takes a photograph using our Boss 311 app of a pothole, what they will often get back from our public works team is a photo of that filled pothole, as well as a photo of the team that actually went out and took care of that issue. We've been working with a set of researchers from the Harvard Business School, Michael Norton and Ryan Buell, who have been focused on sort of making internal operations like this more transparent and its effect on civic engagement. And one of the things that we've seen is that by simply sort of increasing our operational transparency through the civic technology, by showing sort of the team that is doing the work and the work that actually gets done, we're seeing about a 60% increase in people's likelihood to actually report something on their block. And we are seeing people actually report a broader range of things, which to us are good indicators of the way in which civic technology can not just engage our residents, but empower them and sort of expand their civic purview within our city.
Thank you, Chris. Debbie, I want to go to you and ask you the same question, and a little warning to Ed, you'll be next. But Debbie, tell us one thing that you're working on in San Leandro.
So there's so many things, and if Dee gets on or doesn't get on, I can still address our working with her on the STIR program, because that's really important about civic engagement. But Chris, as you know, San Leandro is it's been about infrastructure. We created a public-private partnership with one of our private citizens, a CEO of a local tech company several years ago. We now have a 20-mile fiber optic loop where the city owns a number of fibers in that loop. Question is, what do we do with them? So several years ago, we connected all of our schools, all 17 schools, to a 10 gigabit per second synchronous, ubiquitous link, so that all of our schools and our students now have the access to that kind of technology. And we've also actually implemented our first smart city project. With Climate Tech, we've replaced all 4,000 of our city street lights with new LED lights, and that's of course a no-brainer. Everyone should be doing that. But the smart part about this is a 6-LoWPAN Wi-Fi wireless mesh system that we have on each single one of the lights, which means now we can manipulate the lights. All the data about those lights goes back to a dashboard, City Hall. We can literally manipulate each and every one of those lights. And because it's a wireless mesh network on our street lights, the implication for us is, what else should we be doing with our street lights? Is there a way to monetize this? What are the opportunities to spread free public Wi-Fi throughout the city with this mesh network? So that's one of the things that we're doing right now to really start moving our smart city projects forward.
And thank you, Debbie. For people who heard a little bit of background noise, Debbie is at an event. We're extremely lucky that she was able to find some time to jump in with us, but there's going to be just a little bit of background noise at the event. So Ed, we'll turn to you and ask you to describe something interesting that you're working on in Louisville.
Well, the project that I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit about is called speeduplouisville.com. It's a project that we're not working on currently. It was completed in April 2016. And it was a project that started with our Civic Tech community and then spawned into a project for a local startup. So it really hits a lot of the plays in the Benton Engagement playbook. What it is it's a crowdsourced internet speed test that pulls in information from a speed test and then uploads it to a map. And kind of the idea behind it was we were relying too much on internet service providers to give information about our own internet infrastructure. So we went to the community, asked them to show, what the actual speed tests are for community. And as a feature that we added later after launch, we integrated Open Technology Institute's MLab speed test, which pulls in Google speed test results to our map to make sure we're getting the most information possible from our community. As a result of this work, we understand more about internet service in Louisville than we ever have, and we've collected over close to 200 internet speed tests since April 2016, and all of those results are actually available on speeduplouisville.com. You can download the results. And so the data confirmed a lot of the things that we already thought about where the gaps were in our communities, highlighted some new gaps that we didn't recognize, and really allowed us to make decisions about, one, where we should be focusing our digital inclusion efforts and where we need to make infrastructure investments to make sure that digital redlining wasn't happening in our community, and actually really helped us pass a $5.4 million bond to build out middle mile infrastructure in some of our disadvantaged communities. So pretty exciting work.
That is exciting work, and it leads me to a question, which is, I think Chris dealt with this a little bit, and that's kind of what's the next step of these things. I mean, if I was to pick on Chris a little bit, because you've already answered this question, it's kind of like, how excited should we be about the ability of people to close a pothole and things like that? I mean, is this really going to get us to a stronger, more vibrant democracy? And I just wonder if each of you could address what part this plays in terms of a larger strategy to get people more engaged.
So I certainly agree with the notion that's in the playbook that civic technology is a spectrum, and that there's ways in which at all sorts of engagement and all sorts of decision-making moments in the city's world that there's a civic tech opportunity. I'm not sure that there is necessarily a straight line connection between being able to have a pothole filled and sort of a completely vibrant sort of democracy and engaged citizenry. But I do think that by doing these things, at least within government, you are building up the capacity, the muscle to figure out new ways to reach residents, perhaps in unexpected ways, or residents who have been disconnected otherwise. And so at least within Boston, one of our first examples really was that sort of work of putting a mobile app in people's hands to report things like potholes. But since then, we have done all sorts of other things that are also about engagement, that are also about empowerment, that are also about changing the way in which we do resources, that include things like participatory budgeting projects focused around youth, to public planning processes that have been very focused on getting sort of the most voices and new voices, and not just the loudest voices, into the public conversation. So I do think that what we have seen in Boston is that by starting down the sort of the civic tech road with the intent of engaging and empowering residents, you will do more and more of those things in different arenas of your work, even if it is not sort of built off of sort of one app or one initial initiative.
I want to just follow up on that quick before I open it to Ed and Debbie to jump in. And Chris, one of the things that I feel like that we saw in Boston is that the act of filling in a pothole, of participating, made people more unlikely to engage. Is that right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. So I'm wondering are we seeing that elsewhere with some of the different projects that we're seeing in Louisville and San Leandro?
There's no question. So one of the reasons that I wanted to bring up that infrastructure project, because there is, in this case, an amazing direct line to community, or it happened. So one of the things that benefited us from this is that we got our smart city platform out of this through Paradox Engineering. We didn't really know we were getting that, but we stumbled on it, and now we're incredibly happy about it because it's an open API platform.
Now,
so,
Debbie, sorry. Can you just unpack that a little bit for people who might not be as familiar with what an API is and what you're talking about?
So the thing about smart cities, this whole buzz about smart cities right now, is about data and how you access data. And one of the most powerful ways to be able to access data are through algorithms called APIs. I mean, it's an internet address that allows you to get at information, and I'm not a technologist, but I know that when you're able to get different streams of data, so you can imagine transportation data and demographic data, and you start putting these together in a platform where the data can be parsed and analyzed against each other, now you're starting to get some analytics that start telling you about, is there social justice issues when we deal with our transportation issues? In the environment, are some areas of our city dirtier than others? And what does that look like when you start putting these different data streams together? So in San Leandro, we now have that platform that will allow us to aggregate these different streams of data. One of our local entrepreneurs, Derek Lee of Pilot City, who has an incubator for students, K through 12 and community colleges, invited an ex-student from San Leandro High School who was at Harvey Mudd University, Herrick brought back 6 of his colleagues for the summer. Families put them up in their homes, and they started to work with Paradox Engineering to create a new smart garbage can application. So, oh my goodness, for a city that really has not, this is all new for us. The fact that we were told you now have a platform that you can build applications off of, and then we get our own local students to actually work with us to do that, to work with Paradox Engineering. So now you have some really interesting public-private partnerships. And at the end of the 12 weeks, the community was invited for an entire day through a series of workshops to engage with these young people, to discover what it was that they were building and how it could impact them. The response from the community was overwhelming. There were several hundred people that showed up over the course of a day to engage with these young people, to learn more about the technology and about the potential of building new applications on top of this system that we have. So it's interesting to me that when the community gets engaged, and especially when young people get engaged, they know exactly what to do with this. And they will be teaching us. I mean, honestly, we really need them to teach us the future. We can't build it for them. It's theirs. They have to engage with us on it.
Two things that I just wanted, sorry, before you...
no, please go ahead.
But some thoughts on what Debbie said, because I completely agree. I think there's got 2 points that sort of deeply resonated with me in the work that we're doing here in Boston. One is, it is great to be able to experiment. In many ways, though, you want to be able to experiment from a place of strength. You want to be, particularly if you're providing something new for the public. And so it sounds like what they're doing is to create a platform from which you can do all sorts of new things and engage the public in a fundamentally new way. And I think that has been valuable in the Boston context. We could not have done things around mobile apps around potholes or mobile apps around parking or things like that without the fundamental technical systems to be able to actually, and managerial systems to make sure that we knew how to actually fill those potholes. So there's a component to Civic Tech, which is a little bit more behind the scenes and is often not necessarily even about tech at all, which that will actually make sure that the promise of Civic Tech comes true. And then the second piece I totally agree with from what Debbie was saying, that there is this tremendous amount of buzz right now about smart cities, but I feel like what often gets missed in that conversation is sort of lesson number 1 from the playbook, which is making sure that you're building sort of with people, not necessarily for them. That at least in I think in the city context, or at least in the city hall context, our real focus is figuring out what are the things that residents want, how do we actually provide that to them, and not necessarily thinking of the not sort of looking at a more sort of technocratic form of government, but a more engaging form of government, and that's been sort of a big push for us. And it seems like something we've got in common with Debbie.
Terrific, and I think we have Ed back now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for one thing is mine's a little bit more anecdotal than kind of system-wide, but one of the things that we learned from SpeedUpLouisville.com was just kind of what confirmed some of the areas that we knew we had challenges. So we located the Gigabit Experience Center, which is highlighted in the Benton Awards in the Benton playbook. And what that was kind of a physical space where we were kind of hoping to bring kind of all kinds of new technology events there. So we were able to bring people from all over our community that hadn't been to West Louisville to experience kind of the future of technology. But by locating in that neighborhood, we're actually able to include people from the neighborhood in those events. They end up working with transportation. It's a place that they're familiar with, kind of that partnering with the local institutions. So we had a woman from that actually lives in one of our housing complexes, one of our housing authority complexes, and she participated in a weekend-long startup weekend event. She went all the way through. She made a pitch. She joined a team, was part of the project team all the way through. And so, and I actually just got a text message from her yesterday asking me to like help her put together some developers, and because she's got this idea for an app she wants to do. So I'm going to introduce her to our Civic Tech community and see if she can go in there. So just, I think when you think about kind of taking that digital, kind of the digital engagement, kind of giving it physical space, it really can kind of change people's lives in a lot of ways.
And I think you also did some crowdsourcing type stuff around locations for charging stations for electric vehicles. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, crowdsourcing is one of the tools, and for me, it really started with speeduplouisville.com. We also did a project where we, I forgot what the call-in app that City Voice. We launched a speeduplouisville.com to get the internet speed test. We also did an instance of City Voice, which is a Code for America app to get actual feedback from people along one of our roadway projects. It's a call-in survey app, which is kind of crowdsourcing. And then the other one we've done is electrical vehicle charging stations. So electrical vehicles are, they're coming. There's not a lot of infrastructure out there for them, at least in Louisville right now. So what we did is we put out a survey, a map-based survey for people to kind of tell us where they would like to see electric vehicle charging stations. And actually one of the members of the local electric vehicle kind of, I guess, fan club or kind of organizing group here, they're actually approaching a local institution about locating the station, locating an electric vehicle charging station at their complex because of information they got from the Crowdsource app. It was one of the most popular places. So crowdsourcing, you can do crowdsourcing in a lot of ways. We work with Waze on the Connected Citizens platform, but crowdsourcing, especially when you put it on a map, I think is really helpful for people, and it kind of gives you some interesting information you might not have had before.
Let me first of all, I wanted to make sure that other presenters can just jump in with any thoughts this brings up, but also let me remind people to submit any questions you might have. It doesn't necessarily be about those cities. It could be in general, could be asking for advice with the community where you're at, but feel free to be creative, throw it in, and we'll work it into the stream. Chris and Debbie, either one of you want to jump in with any thoughts?
So Dee is having a hard time getting on the phone, and often she and Jay and I do tag team on the Startup in Residence program. I think it's a really important thing to talk about in terms of civic engagement, so maybe I could just take a whack at that. Definitely a good follow-up on the conversation where we've been right now. So STIR, the Startup in Residence program, was actually started in 2014 in San Francisco. It was very successful. They were able to, what happened is they worked with a number of city departments, identified some challenges that the city departments had that they felt probably had a tech cloud solution, and they went forward and had some very successful programs that Dee would be able to tell you more about. Based upon that, they went to the EDA in Washington, D.C. and said, you know what, we think we could go national on this one, but we need a little bit of help. So they were able to get a 3-year grant for $500,000, and so in 2016 they expanded it out to the Bay Area region, San Leandro, Oakland, and West Sacramento, to see if we wanted to join in on it. I was excited because as a Chief Innovation Officer, really focused on a fiber optic network, I wasn't getting to do a whole lot of civic engagement. That was really troubling to me, especially around changing government. We need transformation so badly. So when San Francisco reaches out to you and says, hey, we got this program, we'd like to invite you to join us, our city manager is not going to say no to that. So we joined up, and we had 2 very successful challenges. The first one was with our recreation department, where we had a brand new recreation manager, and we had just had a new application where people could sign up for programs and sign up for the recreation centers. But she wasn't able to get any data out of this, and she knew there had to be data back there. So she called up the company and said, I'd like to be able to get the data. And they said, no problem, just hit this little button right here, and it'll all be dumped into an Excel spreadsheet, and you can sort the data any way you want. But she was livid. She said, wait a minute, I'm not a techie, but I know there's a dashboard in there somewhere. Debbie, I need some help. So the end of the day, we got a company called Lotta Data to work with us. And within the first 2 weeks, they were able, and by the way, the program is the company works with you, the startup works with you for 16 weeks, develops something that the city either likes or doesn't like. There's no money that exchanges hands. But if the city really likes that, at the end of this, they can contract with that individual or with that company and actually implement the application.
So Debbie, let me just to make sure we nail that down, because
okay.
Honestly, the first time I heard startup in residence, I was thinking more like in Kansas City, where they're just trying to get startups in residences that could have high quality broadband. But this is a situation in which you have people that have specific skills, maybe joining a department temporarily to solve specific problems. Is that a good summary?
Yes, because government is terrible in innovation. Right? We're not rewarded for that. We're a regulatory body. So in order to, and when you work with an enterprise tech company, they often already have the solution figured out, right? They don't listen to you. Oh, we have the perfect solution for you. So you're trying to jam your square peg into that round hole, and it just doesn't work. But when a startup works with you, first of all, this is a big opportunity, right? To be able to get into the government market, huge. But they don't know how to work with us, and we don't necessarily know how to work with them. So the opportunity with the Startup in Residence program is to learn how to work with innovators. And innovators learn to work with regulators. And between the two, magic can happen. So within the first 2 weeks, when Lotta Data did their first magical map of San Leandro and showed us where people lived in San Leandro who were attending our community centers, we discovered some very important facts. First of all, the Hispanic community, which is our largest community in San Leandro, staying away from our community centers and programming in droves. People between the ages of 18 and 35, not showing up. What's going on here? Entire council districts weren't even going and using the community centers. So that began the part, well, what's going wrong? So now we had some information that we could start doing analytics. What was it about our programming that was not appealing to different ethnic communities? Were there programs being done where nobody was even showing up? Data was allowing us to penetrate into the inside of the community to see what it was that they wanted. Now, our department heads are having to think about things very differently when they hire people. For example, our recreation manager hired a data analytics person. Didn't have anybody like that in the department prior to this. Now we're starting to think about data and how we can use that data to better engage our citizens with the programming that they want in our city.
It seems like one of the benefits from not just the startup in residence, but a lot of these programs we've been talking about is that it kind of brings fresh perspectives into local government. I'm curious if anyone wants to sort of jump off of that.
Because I've lost money. I did Ethereum buttons.
Well, for us, we.
Go ahead, Ed.
Well, for us, I'm actually really proud. We don't have a program like Startup in Residence, but we've taken at least 2 projects from startup to, pilot, where it's actually, startup to pilot to actual implementation, where the products have been sold to other cities across the country, or are going to be sold to other cities across the country. Speed Up Louisville is one example, right? Started at a hackathon, then we ended up working with a startup to kind of create this product, and it was sold to San Jose and I think Montgomery County, Maryland. So that's really exciting. The other product that we worked on we had a hackathon. Again, started with a hackathon. We have a problem with fires and vacant abandoned properties in our community, as a lot of communities with a lot of vacant abandoned properties are. One of the big issues with those fires is they become more involved, as in they spread to another building because no one's there, or if the person's there, they're not reporting it to the fire department. So the fires become more involved, become a danger to people next door, also a danger to the firefighters there. So we threw out this challenge to a local makerspace, and what happened they came up with an idea that I just never would have thought of. I just never would have thought of it. I think government really doesn't, I think Debbie's doing a great job. Government doesn't have the kind of monopoly on solutions, but I do say that we have a monopoly on understanding the problem. Just because, we're dealing with it every day, and we kind of understand what the big community issues are. Obviously, civic engagement helps us with that. but we don't necessarily have the monopoly on solutions. So kind of putting it out to the maker community and just kind of giving them some of the bounds, like as in there's no power in these places, need to be able to communicate with kind of our dispatch center. They came up with a solution that listens for a smoke detector, a traditional smoke detector, to go off and then can send a message. So right now we're looking at how we can expand that into close to 200 homes in a certain area of our town, see if that can prevent fires from starting in vacant properties and spreading to another one. But I think that's really kind of, those two examples really show how working with people that are kind of outside of government can really give you solutions that you never would have thought of yourself or been able to build yourself, and then also kind of help other communities solve these same problems. So it's really kind of that multiplier effect.
I definitely agree with Ed, your articulation that I think there's a great value in government not prescribing solutions, but describing the problems, describing the challenges, and then creating frameworks, whether it's startups and residents or something else, that allows the public to sort of bring their skills, their perspective, their resources to bear against those challenges. We've created a structure here in Boston called the Public Space Invitational. It's a little bit less focused on sort of civic tech and more sort of artistic bents, but it allows residents to pitch ideas about how we could make public space better. Everything from the inside of City Hall to the intersection near where they live to city bus stops, and the result of that has been all sorts of both sort of high-tech and low-tech interventions to really animate public space in the city of Boston, and it's been fantastic to sort of see the outpouring of really creative ideas about how to bring more life to our public streets.
And Chris, I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about how some of these technologies have changed the way you deal with the foster care system in Boston.
I'm sorry, the foster care system?
Yes. Do I have that wrong?
That may be the case, but it's not sort of an area of expertise for me.
All right. Well, just consider it a random question. Also, tell me about the Boston Celtics. What I'd like to do is move on to a question for each of you, which is internally, each of your cities has a substantial amount of fiber that it owns that you can use without having to ask for permission or get a quote from a telecommunications company for how you might get a connection to some, other building in the city. And can you tell me at all, like, has that actually been a differentiator, being able to sort of play in your own garden?
Did you direct that at a person? Chris?
I'd like to hear each of you say it. So Debbie, I'd love to hear your take on it first and then go around the horn.
This is also new, this whole idea of fiber optics and then Internet of Things and smart cities. Cities are really struggling, right, to figure out what to do with it. So San Leandro was lucky in that we found ourselves in a situation where we were able to create a lit fiber optic loop. So first it was 11 miles, now it's up to 20 miles with the help of the EDA. The next step was figuring out how to use it and how to use our fibers and what to do with it. So we were kind of backwards. We got the fiber optic loop without even asking really too many questions of people like, what do you need? Because we knew that we needed to have it in order to turn around our industrial city and not lose this major tech company. So we just did it. But today we have all these fibers. We've given 4 to our schools. What do we do with the other we have up to 144 strands that have been dedicated to us that we're not using for anything. So the question for us then became, well, how do we engage our citizens? So right now we are actually finally starting to figure that out. How do we use our fiber optics to create a smart city, and what do our citizens, what do our businesses want out of that? So we're actually in the middle of a fiber optic master plan. We're working with Magellan Advisors and Joey Wolf, who of course was the mastermind behind the creation of the Santa Monica fiber optic loop. And we're going to embark in January on a series of community workshops. They're not town hall meetings. We literally want to work with the community to show them the opportunities that are out there and what they could possibly do with it. And then from there, let us know, what are your priorities? What do you want us to focus on? So as part of this Next Century City says, it's like, what do you want to do with this? What's the point? So that's how we're using the fiber. We're getting it to our citizens. How do you want to use it? We have to teach them first.
Sure. Ed, you know, Louisville seems to be going from 25 miles of fiber for internal use to over 100 miles. And I'm just curious if you've, you know, seen that that makes a difference in terms of your planning.
Yeah, I was going to mention that we can't talk about specific plans because we're still building it out right now. But, you know, just kind of echo Debbie's point again, you know, just to think about, we know that we need this infrastructure. This kind of goes in the face of what we're talking about today. We know that we need this infrastructure. So we've really been trying to have a concerted kind of public education effort about why this is important, opportunities this can bring, why digital redlining is going to, you know, create inequities in the future, and why we have to prevent that in Louisville. So for us, it's really a great opportunity to talk about what is the potential of this, and then kind of work with the community to figure out what kind of things they want in their community that we could help solve, whether what type of IoT sensors that is, or even kind of what kind of businesses, or how do they attract kind of those 21st century businesses to their community. So, you know, for us, it's really gotten us involved in a lot of different conversations. One, we can think about the smart city in a cost-effective way, where it's like, if we don't have a fiber network, we couldn't do that. So that's interesting. And then that can kind of lead to what kind of sensors do you want in your community? You know, but it also allows us to get involved in economic development conversations that we had never been in before as an innovation team. But now, because of all this fiber, it's really starting to become part of our economic development plans. So really for us, it really allows us to think about, you know, really what do we want as a smart city, because now it's probably going to be economically viable for us. And also, how do we encourage economic development in different areas of our community with good fiber infrastructure, which is what we try to do with that $5.4 million build that I discussed earlier.
And Chris, I'm curious with, I know Boston also has significant fiber for internal usage. How does that change what you're able to do?
Sure. So I think there's a set of goals that we know that our residents want to be able to deliver on. One is sort of increase access to digital resources on the internet. The second is to actually be able to move people on our streets better. And the third is deliver better city services. The fiber backbone that we have is helpful in all three of those dimensions. So by having fiber to our schools, to our community centers, we're able to get more people online and higher quality service. We certainly are using fiber along our major corridors to be able to connect all of our traffic signals and bring the traffic signal feeds back to our traffic management center here in City Hall, which allows us to be able to remotely manage those traffic signals today, and also be able to prepare for the next generation of adaptive signal technology that will be coming in our streets. And to Ed's point, you know, that third area of delivering great city services, I don't think that the world of IoT sensors has largely matured yet to a state where we think that there is necessarily a sensor which necessitates broad deployment on city streets, but having that fiber backbone does set us up for the point when there is a product which we want to more broadly deploy that will more effectively and efficiently be able to do that.
You know, since you say that, Chris, we have two great questions from the audience I'm about to get to, but you just made me think, you know, mentioning the maturity of the IoT sensors, you're running a secure network. Are you concerned with the total lack of security of what we're seeing in the IoT space right now? Which, in case anyone's confused, is the Internet of Things, which is generally lower cost sensors that anyone can buy and plug into a network for reporting or doing a task.
I think there's no question for a lot of IoT things. There's not only sort of really important security questions, but also really important privacy questions that are essential to sort of wrestle with and answer before you take solutions to scale. Absolutely.
So one of the questions from the audience, and definitely we can jump back and forth if anyone else had anything else they want to bring up. But this is a really good question, is saying that in this city, they often find that those who can volunteer or donate code and get involved in some of these solutions may not represent the demographics of the population as a whole. And so what can one do to try and get more equity and participation?
Well, I'd love to hop in here because I think this really kind of plays to that kind of physical space and location. Location matters. You know, we stuck the Gigabit Experience Center right next to one of our largest public housing complexes as with the idea that this would make it easier for people to engage. Now, obviously, there's still people that they're not going to have the best time to be able to get there, whether they work on the weekends or in the evenings. But I think sticking these kind of civic tech events, sticking technology events actually in the neighborhoods that you may have trouble engaging with through traditional digital means is really important. And like I was talking about earlier, that woman that we engaged with, she was able to go to Startup Weekend because of that, and now she's going to be getting involved in our civic tech community. And again, that's anecdotal, but we saw a lot of participation from the neighborhoods that I know we wouldn't have seen if we had put it in a different part of town. So I think locating digital events, especially when you're talking about civic tech or any of these events in those type of neighborhoods, is really how you do that.
And in San Leandro, we do that by connecting directly with the schools. So we're one of the most diverse cities in America, right behind Oakland, I think number 4 or 5, something like that. So the way you start to increase that, or the way you start to deal with that, is you work directly with your students. And in San Leandro, we really want our students to stay in San Leandro. So in the past, they've gone to college or they've left San Leandro because they felt it was a suburban community, it was boring, there was nothing to do there. So to directly engage our students and get them excited about the tech, like the way we did with these Harvey Mudd University students who came, and by the way, except for one of them, there was one Caucasian woman, the rest were all people of color. That's really how you start to get it. Once they have the skills, you can't turn them back anymore.
Great. And Chris, did you have any thoughts?
I think both those are really fantastic examples. One that is a little bit different, I would say, sort of a secondary route, is that one of the things that we did a couple of years ago was we really wanted to start fixing the permitting system within the city of Boston. What the experience was for an architect or a construction company or even somebody doing home repairs, to be able to go through the permitting process in the city of Boston. A lot of those folks are not the same folks who show up at a typical hackathon or coding night, but we intentionally sort of had a weekend where we brought together folks who sort of pulled permits, did construction, et cetera, for a living, with those folks who coded for fun, and had a sort of a weekend event where we basically sort of got those folks together. One shared through their experiences and their challenges, and another started trying to tackle them with some quick digital products. To sort of amplify that message, we did essentially some video ethnography in advance to sort of capture some stories and about the sort of permitting process, and all of that actually led to a good set of sort of first products, which we then sort of used as inspiration for a more comprehensive RFP to redo the digital experience of applying for a permit in the city of Boston. So it was a good way to sort of connect a very active and coding community here in the Boston area with some folks who were having some challenges that we wanted to be able to address in city government.
Chris, I'm curious as a follow-up, are there any things that you've done on the app side to make sure that you're reaching a larger audience with the applications, like the fixing potholes and things like that?
That's a great question. So certainly it's something where, there's a couple things. One, the app is only one channel. We still do maintain a 24-hour phone hotline. We have tried some additional things around text as opposed to a mobile app. We've tried some things so the app would basically work better for the experience would be better for folks who don't speak English as a first language. We do a lot of promotion, but I'll say that a big thing that we are also very focused on is recognizing the fact that that 311, no matter how reports come in, are not necessarily a complete picture of the neighborhood issues that exist in our city. And so we're very focused actually right now on thinking on sort of collecting information and doing surveys and being very intentional about particularly our capital investment, where we resurface streets, where we fix sidewalks, where we retime signals, that are based on a wider set of information than simply the calls or reports we get through our 311 system. And by doing that, we are sort of trying to be very intentional about foregrounding equity in our approach to delivering city services here in Boston.
We have another question coming in that I'll get to in a second after I read it. It came in just now. But Debbie, one of the things that a person asked about was how cities are managing the infrastructure assets you're creating to be able to manage them and maintain them. I think this is something that you're undoubtedly dealing with. And I'll just note that I've heard many times from cities that they have conduit, they have fiber. It was put in 20 years ago and nobody has any idea where it is.
Oh, we do. We know exactly where it is. So we map it. So every time a permit comes in, and again, we're a small city. We're 15 square miles. So this is not like we're dealing with San Francisco or Boston. So we put in our first fiber optic conduit like 15 years ago, and for whatever reason, they did it right in terms of mapping it. Now, what we don't have today is a digital mapping system, and that we know we absolutely need to have. Where do the fibers go? Where do they break off? Where do they exit the public right-of-way and go into a building? Who do they serve? Why aren't we multiplexing? And are some of our fibers that are now 20 years old starting to wear out? Yes, it's a concern. Actually, part of our fiber optic master plan is for us to come up with a strategy for dealing with identifying those fibers that are in fact aging out, and the maintenance of it, the improvement of how we use it, so that we can really maximize the robustness of that broadband and the uses for it. We're doing that now, but you're right. If cities are not doing that, if they're not even preparing for the fiber optic future, let alone, and those that do that are not on top of it, we're not really preparing for the Internet of Things future.
Now, Debbie, we did get a comment from someone saying that they use their GIS department to map their fiber plant. I'm curious. You mentioned that it wasn't digital. You mean you have paper maps? What?
Maps. Our IT guy is not happy that we're still dealing with PDFs and paper maps, and we know exactly where it is, but he's like, we can't continue to do it this way. Okay. So yeah, we're still doing off of paper. It's crazy.
Probably not the craziest thing I've heard today, but needs to be fixed.
Yes, it needs to be fixed.
Ed, any reaction to that in terms of how y'all are managing and what tools specifically you might be using?
Well, the first way we manage is we put somebody in charge of our fiber network. Chris Sight, he's our Civic Technology Manager. He's the person that's kind of day-to-day responsible for our fiber network and our fiber plan. So having that one person kind of assigning somebody and even making it their primary focus of their job, I think is an incredibly important thing to do. In terms of mapping, he's got an actual solution. I will definitely, I'll have to round up with him about what it is, but it costs around $1,500 a year. It allows you to, they pull in fiber maps, even from private people, private providers there, but then also, I think, just trying to working with your GIS departments to make sure that they've got the most up-to-date stuff is really important. We had a big push this last summer as we were building out our network to build out our maps, because, there's always just Chris, he signed up for 811 with the big stuff, to find out when their fibers are getting hit, but he was always just getting random calls about fibers getting hit, and got to the point where he's just like, I just got to take some time and sit down and map it out. So that's really the way that we've been handling it, and I'll definitely figure out which service he's using, because I think he found it, was really excited about it. It was around $1,500 a year, which was pretty affordable, and provides him a lot of great information.
Great. Anything to add, Chris?
Our Duo team is spending a lot of time right now sort of addressing exactly the question that you asked, Chris. Our IT team figuring out how best to map the conduit that we have, the fiber that we have, both for our own useful uses as well as for other uses that can, again, sort of achieve those objectives that our residents want to get done.
Great. GIS is insanely useful for being able to sort of combine all kinds of interesting queries. For people who aren't familiar with it, it's, boy, it gives you so much more information than you could realize. The last question comes from Seattle, and it's a terrific question about whether or not you're using tech for remote public hearings, and I suspect not just viewing public hearings, but being able to participate using multi-site community meetings, and as a subset of that, anything in terms of dealing with language limitations from multilingual issues to signing and interpretation.
It's really hard. If somebody else out there has an answer to that, I mean, we're still doing it the old-fashioned way. Newsletters go out. They've been interpreted in several different languages, not necessarily using tech, but just having people doing the translations. Town hall meetings, somebody gets up there, we have a signer, we have, if it's a heavily ethnic group, then there's somebody translating. We have really struggled with the technology side of this and how to engage with different ethnicities and people have different needs. Help.
You don't have to be so despondent. I think maybe some people are relieved that you haven't figured everything out, Debbie.
Yeah, my comment would be if Seattle hasn't figured it out, who has figured it out? Typically, I feel like they're leading the way on a lot of this stuff. So we're not doing that. I think we'd love to be able to do that, but we're not quite at that place yet.
No.
I mean, similar story in Boston. Almost all of our public hearings are viewable online, and we also actually broadcast them on TV as well, either in real time or delayed. To address exactly this issue, the mayor recently established a new position of somebody who basically is coming in focusing completely on language access, translation, interpretation, to figure out how we actually put in place the right sort of supports, whether it is for our public meetings or simply at a permit counter, to be able to actually make sure we're delivering great services to all of our residents. So I think it's an area that we're going to be heavily focused on in the year and years ahead, but one that similarly I don't think that we have completely solved yet either.
Well, one idea, as we're running out of time, is that for at least written translation, you could just have an algorithm turn your R's into H's in Boston, and that would the larger part of the
that is true.
population.
Yep, exactly.
Well, thank you, panelists. Thank you for the questions from the audience. I will turn it back over to Kat to wrap up.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call today, and thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your wisdom. This was a great conversation, and I hope that everyone found it helpful. As I mentioned earlier, a recording of this webinar will be available on our site later today. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.